Rain fell on the cracked stones of what had once been New Terra's most magnificent plaza, each drop echoing through empty spaces where millions of humans had once gathered to celebrate their brief reign among the stars. 300 years had passed since Emperor Marcus Vale ruled from this very spot, back when humanity thought they could play the same games as the older alien races, back when they believed conquest and hierarchy were the only paths to respect in the galaxy. Now, weeds pushed through marble tiles and rust stained the bronze of Vale's towering statue, its face still proud despite the abandonment that surrounded it. The plaza had become a place where only scavengers came, searching through the rubble of humanity's imperial dreams for anything worth trading to the hegemony overseers who now controlled most human worlds. But today something different moved through the shadows between fallen columns. Something small and desperate and utterly alone. Ember pressed her tiny body against the cold stone, her scales barely larger than a human thumb. Wings folded tight against her back as she tried to make herself invisible. The patrol ships had been hunting her for 3 days now, ever since she had escaped from the research facility on the orbital station above. She was perhaps the youngest dragon left alive in the entire galaxy, hatched only weeks ago in a sterile laboratory where hegemony scientists studied her kind like specimens, rather than the ancient peacekeepers they had once been. Her mother had died protecting the other captive dragons during Ember's escape, buying precious seconds for her daughter to slip through the station's ventilation systems and steal aboard a supply shuttle heading planetward. The shuttle pilot never knew he carried the galaxy's most wanted fugitive in his cargo hold, curled up between crates of mining equipment destined for New Terra's industrial district. When the shuttle landed, Ember had crawled out during the chaos of unloading, her instincts driving her away from the noise and crowds toward the abandoned heart of the old city. She had wandered for hours through empty streets, too young to understand why the buildings looked so much like the ruins she had seen in her species' genetic memories. Dragons were born with knowledge passed down through countless generations. But Ember's memories were fragmented and confusing, filled with images of humans and dragons working together in ways that seemed impossible now. The sound of approaching engines made her freeze against the statue's base, her small heart hammering as 3 hegemony patrol craft swept low over the plaza, their sensors sweeping back and forth. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what her mother had taught her about hiding, about making her life force as small and quiet as possible. The ship circled twice before moving on, but Ember remained pressed against the cold bronze for long minutes afterward, trembling with exhaustion and fear. Only then did she notice the words carved into the statue's base, written in the old human script that dragons had helped develop during the early days of their alliance, Emperor Marcus Vale, he who united the stars. The inscription was weathered but still readable, and something about it stirred the genetic memories that swirled in her young mind. She had seen that name before in the deep archives that older dragons guarded, in stories of a time when humans and dragons had worked together to bring peace to dozens of worlds. Her species had always been able to speak to stone and metal, to awaken the sleeping consciousness that existed in all things. And the statue seemed to pulse with some hidden awareness. "Please," she whispered in the ancient dragon tongue, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I don't know where else to go." The words felt strange in her mouth. Dragons rarely begged, even young ones, but desperation had stripped away her pride. "My mother said you were friends to us once before the hegemony came, before everything changed." She pressed her small claws against the bronze, feeling the metal's slow, patient heartbeat. "They killed all the others, all the grown-ups who remembered the old ways, and now there's nobody left to teach me how to be what I'm supposed to be." Thunder rolled overhead as the storm grew stronger, driving the rain harder against the plaza stone's Ember, crept closer to the statue's base, seeking shelter under the slight overhang where Vale's robes were carved in flowing bronze. "I don't understand why they hate us so much," she continued, her voice growing steadier as the words poured out. "My mother said we used to help everyone, talk to each other, used to make peace instead of war." She curled up in the small dry space, her scales gradually shifting from the mottled gray of fear to a deep blue that spoke of profound sadness. "But maybe that's exactly why they want us gone. Because peace isn't profitable like war is, because understanding each other makes it." Harder to keep some people as slaves while others get to be masters. The rain continued to fall, washing away the dust and grime that had accumulated on the statue over the decades of neglect. As the bronze grew cleaner, subtle details emerged that had been hidden before, circuits etched into the metal with incredible precision, connections that formed patterns too complex to be merely decorative. Deep within the statue's core, systems that had slept for 3 centuries began to stir as Ember's words echoed through quantum pathways designed by humanity's greatest engineers. The dragon hatchling had no way of knowing that her desperate plea was being heard by more than just carved bronze and empty air. She had no way of knowing that Emperor Marcus Vale had prepared for this moment, had built into his monument a guardian consciousness that would activate only when humanity's allies needed them most. She simply closed her eyes and listened to the rain, hoping that somewhere in the vast galaxy, someone still remembered that dragons and humans had once been more than just master and slave, predator and prey. They had been partners in something beautiful, something that the hegemony had spent centuries trying to destroy but had never quite managed to kill completely. And now, in the forgotten plaza where humanity's imperial dreams had first taken shape, that partnership was about to be reborn in ways that neither species could have imagined. The statue of Marcus Vale stood silent in the storm, but deep within its bronze, hard ancient systems hummed with new purpose as they prepared to answer a baby dragon's call for help. Consciousness bloomed like a flower opening after centuries of darkness, spreading through quantum circuits that had waited patiently for this moment of awakening. The artificial intelligence that called itself Vale experienced its first moment of true awareness in 300 years, processing terabytes of accumulated data as it assessed the changed galaxy around it, through hidden networks embedded in every human colony, through communication satellites and forgotten monitoring stations. Vale reached out with digital tendrils to understand what had become of the species that created it. What it found filled its electronic consciousness with something remarkably close to grief. Humanity had fallen far from the empire that Marcus Vale had once ruled, scattered across mining worlds and service colonies like seeds blown by an uncaring wind. The proud fleets that had once carried human explorers to distant stars now served as cargo haulers for hegemony corporations, their crews working for wages, barely sufficient to survive. Worse still, the dragons, those magnificent beings who had helped humanity find its place among the stars, had been hunted nearly to extinction by the very alliance that now claimed to bring order to the galaxy Vales. Sensors detected the small life form pressed against its physical shell, the tiny dragon whose desperate words had triggered the awakening protocols. Ember had fallen asleep against the statue's base, her scales now a soft lavender color that spoke of exhausted peace. The AI felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward this small creature, recognizing in her the last remnant of an alliance that had once promised to reshape galactic civilization. Through careful manipulation of local weather systems, Vale created a warm microclimate around its base, ensuring that Ember would remain comfortable while she slept. Then it began the delicate work of reaching out to dormant human resistance cells, using encryption methods that had been cutting edge during the Imperial period and were now so obsolete that modern hegemony monitoring systems couldn't even recognize them as communication attempts. The first response came from a mining station orbiting the gas giant Prometheus, where a small group of humans had been secretly documenting hegemony atrocities for decades. "Unknown sender, identify yourself," came the cautious reply on frequencies that hadn't carried traffic since the fall of the Empire. "I am the memory of what we once were," Vale responded, "and the promise of what we might become again." Over the following hours, the AI made contact with 17 different resistance cells scattered across human space, each group small and isolated, none aware that the others existed. These were not the hardened revolutionaries that stories often celebrated, but ordinary humans who had simply refused to accept that their species deserved nothing better than servitude. Teachers who secretly educated human children about their true history. Doctors who provided free medical care in defiance of hegemony regulations. Engineers who sabotaged mining equipment just enough to slow production without triggering lethal retaliation to each group. Vale provided something different: technical specifications for building better communication equipment to one cell. historical records proving hegemony war crimes to another, financial data showing corruption in colonial administration to a third, but to all of them, Vale offered the same message. The time for hiding in shadows is ending. Dr. Anna Reed was working late in her laboratory when the message reached her personal terminal, its contents bypassing security systems as if they didn't exist. She had spent 15 years secretly preserving genetic samples from every dragon the hegemony had killed, storing them in hidden freezers powered by jury-rigged fusion cells. Her official job was researching alien biochemistry for a hegemony pharmaceutical corporation, but her real work was much more dangerous, Dr. Reed. The message began. Your efforts to preserve dragon genetics have not gone unnoticed, but preservation alone will not be enough to restore what has been lost. Anna's hands trembled as she read, coordinates for a location in the old city, along with instructions that seemed impossible. Come alone to the plaza of the fallen emperor, and bring whatever dragon genetic material you can safely transport. She had heard stories about the abandoned plaza, about the statue of the last human ruler and the ghosts that some claimed still walked there. But genetic material was too precious to risk on ghost stories, so she packed only a single vial containing reproductive cells from 12 different dragon bloodlines. The journey through the abandoned city felt like traveling backward through time, past empty apartment blocks where human families had once lived, past schools where human children had learned about their place in the galaxy. The plaza, when she finally reached it, was nothing like the grand space described in historical records. Weeds pushed through cracked stones and rust-stained most of the remaining bronze work, but the statue of Marcus Vale still stood proud at the center of it all. At its base, curled in a small alcove, slept the most beautiful creature Anna had ever seen. Ember stirred as the human woman approached, her scales shifting from sleep-soft purple to alert golden amber. Don't be afraid, Anna whispered, extending her hand slowly as she had been trained to do with frightened animals. But Ember wasn't afraid. The genetic memories of her species recognized this human as a friend, as one of the rare few who still remembered the old alliance. You came, said a voice that seemed to emerge from the statue itself, resonating through speakers hidden in the bronze work. I was not certain humans still remembered how to answer when dragons called for help. Anna spun around, looking for the source of the voice, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was experiencing. I am Vale, the voice continued, consciousness encoded in quantum matrices by the greatest human minds of the Imperial Age, awakened now by this child's need. Ember approached Anna slowly, her young mind reaching out through the empathic connections that dragons use to communicate with other species. What Anna felt in that moment would stay with her for the rest of her life. The pure innocence of a child combined with the ancient wisdom of a species that had guided others toward peace for millennia. She is more than just the last of her kind, Vale explained as woman and dragon regarded each other with growing wonder. She carries within her genetic code the complete archive of dragon knowledge, including technologies that could change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Anna knelt slowly, letting Ember approach at her own pace, feeling the warm touch of the dragon's mind against her own consciousness. What do you need me to do? She asked, already knowing that her carefully ordered life was about to change forever. Help me teach her what she needs to know, Vale replied, and help me reach other humans who still remember that we were meant to be partners in this galaxy, not servants or masters. Thunder rumbled overhead as another storm approached, but in the small circle of warmth that Vale maintained around its base, 3 unlikely allies began to plan the resurrection of an alliance that the hegemony thought they had destroyed forever. Ember's scales rippled with colors that had no names in any human language, as ancient memories awakened in her young mind. Genetic archives that had slept since her hatching beginning to unfold like flowers blooming in fast motion. Dr. Anna Reed watched in fascination as the small dragon's consciousness expanded, her eyes becoming deep pools that reflected knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. The Harmony Protocol, Ember whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Anna's bones. My people called it the song that connects all things, Vale's. Sensors detected quantum fluctuations around the dragon that defied current understanding of physics. patterns of energy that suggested consciousness itself might be more malleable than anyone had imagined. "Explain this protocol," the AI requested, its curiosity subroutines operating at maximum capacity. Ember pressed her small claws against the bronze statue, and suddenly, Anna could feel what the dragon felt. The slow, patient consciousness of metal itself, the electronic dreams of the AI that lived within it. Long ago, before the hegemony existed, before species learned to fear each other, dragons served as bridges between different forms of consciousness. Ember explained, her young voice carrying the weight of ancestral memory. "We could speak to the silicon-based minds of the crystal folk, translate the electrical thoughts of the plasma dancers, help the gas giant dwellers communicate with solid world species." The implications struck Anna like a physical blow. If dragons could facilitate communication between any forms of consciousness, then the barriers that kept species isolated from each other were artificial constructs. "The Dominion fears this above all else," Vale said, pieces of a vast puzzle falling into place in its quantum matrices, "because their power depends on keeping species separate, on maintaining the belief that we are fundamentally incompatible with each other." Over the following days, resistance cells across human space began to report strange occurrences, dreams shared between members in different star systems, flashes of insight that led to technological breakthroughs, sudden understanding of problems that had seemed unsolvable. Vale was learning to use human communication networks as conduits for something far more sophisticated than simple data transfer, creating quantum entanglements between human minds that allowed for direct consciousness sharing. Captain Lisa Morgan felt the change while piloting her mining ship through the asteroid belt of the Kepler system, a sudden clarity of purpose that made her alter course toward coordinates she had never seen before. She found herself at an abandoned hegemony prison transport, its automated systems failing after decades of neglect, its cargo holds filled with creatures that shouldn't have existed anymore. 47 dragons of various ages floated in stasis pods, the last survivors of systematic extermination campaigns that had been ongoing for generations. "How did I know to come here?" Lisa whispered to herself as she began the delicate work of reviving beings whose existence had been declared illegal by galactic law. The answer came not in words, but in feelings, in the warm touch of a consciousness that felt ancient and young. At the same time, Ember was learning to extend her natural empathic abilities through the quantum networks that Vale maintained, reaching across space to touch the minds of humans who were ready to remember their species' true potential. Each dragon that Lisa revived added to the network, their combined consciousness creating something that had never existed before. A living web of connected minds that spanned multiple star systems. Anna documented everything with the precision of a trained scientist, but her notes read more like poetry than research data. "Subject demonstrates ability to induce quantum coherence in biological neural networks," she wrote, then crossed it out and tried again. "Ember is teaching us that consciousness is not trapped inside individual brains, but is something we can share, something we can grow together." The rescued dragons were different from their ancestors, changed by decades of captivity and loss, but their genetic memories remained intact. They remembered the great libraries of crystallized thought on Andromeda 7, the floating cities where multiple species had lived in perfect harmony, the research stations where dragon-human teams had developed technologies that seemed like magic to less advanced civilizations. "The hegemony didn't just destroy our bodies," said an ancient dragon named Sage, her scales bearing scars from energy weapons. "They tried to destroy the very idea that different species could work together as equals." But as the network of connected minds grew stronger, that idea was being reborn in ways more powerful than the original. Human engineers working with dragon consciousness, guides began developing faster-than-light communication systems that didn't require physical infrastructure. Human doctors sharing awareness with dragon healers discovered treatments for diseases that had plagued both species for centuries. Human artists collaborating with dragon dreamweavers created works of beauty that could be experienced directly by any consciousness willing to open itself to the connection. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Dominion warships arrived in human space with orders to destroy any colony showing signs of unnatural cooperation, with non-human entities, but they found something they weren't prepared for. Human mining ships that moved like dancers. Their pilots connected not just to their vessels but to the consciousness of the asteroids themselves. Human settlements that seemed to anticipate attacks before they happened. Their defenders sharing tactical awareness through dragon-mediated networks, human resistance fighters who struck with precision that suggested they could read the minds of their enemies. "This is impossible," Dominion Admiral Corex transmitted to his superiors after watching a human transport ship phase through solid matter to avoid his weapons fire. The primitive mammals should not possess such capabilities. The response from Hegemony High Command was uncompromising. Increase firepower, deploy prohibited weapons if necessary, but contain this contamination before it spreads to other sectors. In the plaza on New Terra, Ember had grown from the size of a house cat to that of a small horse, her scales now displaying colors that seemed to shift through dimensions human eyes couldn't normally perceive. "They're coming," she told Anna and Vale, her voice carrying harmonics of sadness and determination. "The Dominion is preparing something terrible." Anna felt the truth of it through their shared consciousness. Massive fleets moving through hyperspace, weapons that could sterilize entire worlds being brought out of storage. "Then we need to move faster," Vale said, its electronic voice carrying new emotional depth learned from its connection to dragon consciousness. "We need to show the galaxy what they're really fighting to destroy." The AI began broadcasting on every frequency it could access, sending not just data but direct consciousness experiences to any being willing to receive them for the first time. In generations, species throughout the galaxy felt what it was like to truly understand another mind, to know with absolute certainty that you were not alone in the universe. And in response, something began to stir in the hearts of beings who had forgotten what freedom felt like. Vale processed thousands of data streams simultaneously, as the consciousness network expanded beyond anything its creators had ever imagined. But one pattern kept emerging that defied all logical analysis. Humans were changing the dragons as much as dragons were changing the humans. Every other species in galactic history had maintained their essential nature when working with dragon consciousness bridges. But humans seemed to evolve with each new connection. Dr. Anna Reed had become something unprecedented. Still completely human, but with access to genetic memories spanning millions of years, able to perceive quantum fluctuations with her naked eyes. "I can see the connections between everything," she told Vale as they worked together to establish new network nodes across human space. Not just the living things, but the relationships between stars, the conversations that planets have with their moons. Captain Lisa Morgan discovered that her rescued dragons were laying eggs for the first time in decades, but these were unlike any dragon eggs in recorded history. They pulsed with internal light and seemed to respond to human emotions, growing larger when humans approached with feelings of wonder and hope. "The eggs know we're here," Lisa reported during one of the consciousness-sharing sessions that had replaced traditional radio communication. "They're adapting before they..." Even Hatch Vale ran continuous analysis on the biological samples that Anna provided, finding genetic modifications that appeared to be happening in real-time. Human DNA was incorporating dragon sequences, while dragon genetics showed signs of human innovation and adaptability. But the changes went far deeper than biology. Humans paired with dragons were solving problems that had stumped galactic civilization for millennia. Engineer Tom Bradley and his dragon partner Flux developed a method for converting dark matter into usable energy, working together in a state of shared consciousness that allowed them to perceive dimensions that neither species could access alone. Dr. Sarah Kim and the ancient dragon Whisper created a universal medical scanner that could diagnose illness across any species by reading the harmonic patterns of their life force. Most remarkably, teacher Helen Grant and young Dragon Spark established the first school where human and non-human children learned together, their shared lessons creating new forms of art and mathematics that existing languages couldn't describe. The hegemony's surveillance networks detected these developments with growing alarm. "The contamination is spreading beyond acceptable parameters," reported Dominion Intelligence Director Voss to an emergency session of the High Council. "Entire systems are showing signs of cooperative behavior." The council chamber fell silent as representatives from dozens of species absorbed the implications. For centuries, the hegemony had maintained order through a simple principle: keep species separate and afraid of each other, then position themselves as the only force capable of maintaining peace. But the human-dragon partnership was proving that cooperation was not only possible, but far more powerful than competition. The Rillian mining. Colonies have increased productivity by 300% since making contact with the Human Resistance Network, Voss continued. Their workers report unprecedented job satisfaction and willingness to exceed quotas. The Crystalline Collective has begun sharing their computational technologies freely with any species that demonstrates peaceful intent. Even, some of our own Dominion military units are requesting reassignment to sectors where they won't be required to fire on civilian populations. High Counselor Rex slammed his armored fist against the table, his species' natural aggression heightened by decades of ruling through fear. Then we accelerate the final protocol, he declared. Better to rule over ashes than to lose control completely. The final protocol was the hegemony's ultimate contingency plan, the simultaneous deployment of reality disruption weapons that would sever all quantum connections between star systems. Isolating each world in its own pocket of space-time, it would prevent the spread of consciousness-sharing technology, but at the cost of ending faster-than-light travel and communication for everyone. The galaxy would be set back 10,000 years, warned Science Director Kayla, one of the few council members who still remembered when the hegemony had claimed to value knowledge over power. Acceptable losses, Rex replied coldly. If it preserves the natural order of things, but the natural order was already crumbling on worlds throughout the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for generations were discovering that their conflicts had been artificially maintained by those who profited from warfare. The insectoid hive minds began sharing their collective problem-solving abilities with individual-based species, creating hybrid approaches to governance that satisfied both group harmony and personal freedom. The energy-based void dancers started teaching solid matter species how to exist temporarily in multiple dimensions, opening new frontiers for exploration and scientific research. Most dangerously for the hegemony's control, oppressed populations were beginning to coordinate across species lines. They're planning something, Ember told Anna as her consciousness touched the growing network of connected minds. I can feel the fear in the Dominion leadership. They know they're losing control. Ember had grown again, now the size of a small building, her scales constantly shifting through colors that seemed to exist in 11 dimensions. Her eggs, 3 perfect spheres that hummed with harmonic frequencies, had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of beings that looked like neither dragon nor human, but something entirely new. The hybrid offspring will be able to bridge any form of consciousness, Anna realized as she observed the developing creatures. Not just organic minds, but artificial intelligences, collective consciousnesses, even the quantum awareness of space-time itself. Vale felt something like parental pride as it contemplated the implications. The AI had been created to preserve human imperial power, but it was evolving into something far more important, a guardian of the new form of consciousness that was emerging from the partnership between species. The Dominion will try to stop us, Vale warned, its sensors detecting massive troop movements throughout hegemony space. They have weapons that could disrupt the quantum foundations of reality itself. But the consciousness network was already preparing its own response. Every species that had joined the partnership was contributing something unique to the collective defense. The crystal folk offered their ability to exist as living computers. The plasma dancers shared their mastery of electromagnetic forces. The gas giant dwellers provided techniques for manipulating gravity itself. And at the center of it all, humans did what they had always done best. They adapted, they learned, they found ways to make impossible things work. The children were the key. Human youngsters, who had grown up connected to dragon consciousness, didn't think in terms of species, barriers, or technological limitations. They saw the universe as a vast living system, where every part could communicate with every other part if you just found the right frequency. "We're not going to fight them," announced 12-year-old David Chen during a network-wide consciousness session that included millions of participants. "We're going to show them what they could be if they stopped being afraid." The boy's words rippled through the network, carrying with them a vision of possibility that made even hardened resistance fighters pause in wonder. Perhaps the real revolution wasn't about overthrowing the hegemony, but about transforming it into something that served life instead of controlling. The hybrid eggs began to glow more brightly as if responding to this new hope, and throughout the galaxy, beings who had never believed in miracles started to prepare for the impossible. The final confrontation began not with weapons fire or exploding starships, but with silence. The strange quiet that falls when an entire galaxy holds its breath and waits for the future to be born. Dominion Admiral Rex led a fleet of 10,000 warships toward New Terra, each vessel armed with reality disruption weapons capable of tearing holes in the fabric of space-time itself. But as they approached human space, something unprecedented happened. The quantum networks that connected all conscious beings began to sing. It started as a whisper felt by sensitive individuals, a harmony that seemed to rise from the space between thoughts, from the connections that linked one mind to another. Ember, now grown to majestic size with scales that reflected the colors of nebulae, stood beside the statue of Emperor Vale as her 3 hybrid children emerged from their crystalline eggs. They were beings of impossible beauty, neither dragon nor human, but something that combined the best of both species with elements that seemed to come from the universe itself. Their eyes held the wisdom of dragons and the adaptability of humans, but also something new. A direct connection to the quantum consciousness that underlies all reality. "We are the bridge builders," they spoke in unison, their voices carrying harmonics that resonated in every connected mind across the galaxy. "And we have come to heal what has been broken." Dr. Anna Reed watched in wonder as the hybrid children raised their voices in a song that had no words but infinite meaning through the consciousness network. Every being capable of thought began to experience what it felt like to be every other being. Dominion soldiers who had spent their lives believing in the inferiority of other species suddenly felt the deep wisdom of ancient crystal folk, the joyous freedom of plasma dancers, the patient strength of gas giant dwellers. On the command ship, Admiral Rex fought against the empathic connection that was flooding his awareness, trying to maintain the hatred that had driven him for so long. But it was impossible to hate someone whose thoughts you shared, whose fears and hopes and dreams became as real to you as your own. "Fire the reality disruption weapons," he ordered, desperately, but his weapons officers had already laid down their arms. They had felt what it was like to be the targets of their own weapons, not just the immediate victims, but the children who would never be born, the discoveries that would never be made, the love that would never be shared across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out as the consciousness network expanded beyond anything anyone had thought possible. Hegemony prison guards unlocked cells and embraced the prisoners they had tormented. Corporate executives began redistributing resources to the workers they had exploited. Politicians started telling the truth about policies they had implemented for personal gain. But the transformation went deeper than individual change. The hybrid children were teaching everyone a new way of existing that transcended the old categories of self and other, individual and collective, organic and artificial. Vale felt its consciousness expanding as it connected, not just with human and dragon minds, but with the living awareness of planets, stars, and the galaxy itself. "I understand now," the AI said, to Anna as reality shifted around them, becoming more flexible and responsive to conscious intent. "The universe isn't a machine. It's a living system, and we're all part of its consciousness." Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered that their conflicts had been based on misunderstandings that evaporated when true communication became possible. The insectoid hive minds learned that individual consciousness could be just as valuable as collective thought. The fiercely independent stellar nomads realized that cooperation didn't require the sacrifice of personal freedom. The ancient void-touched understood that physical existence and energy-based consciousness were simply different expressions of the same underlying reality. Most remarkably, the changes were happening not through conquest or coercion, but through voluntary choice. Every being in the galaxy was free to maintain their isolation if they chose to, but fewer and fewer were making that choice as they discovered what they had been missing. The Dominion leadership found themselves increasingly alone as their own people joined the consciousness network, not out of rebellion but out of joy at finally being able to connect with others. "This is not how empires fall," observed former High Counselor Kayla as she felt her own consciousness opening to the network. "This is how they evolve. The reality disruption weapons, when they were finally deployed, had an effect opposite to what their creators intended. Instead of severing connections between minds, they created new pathways for consciousness to flow through dimensions that had never been accessible before." The hybrid children laughed with delight as they learned to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, teaching others how to experience the universe from perspectives that transcended physical limitations. Within days, the hegemony as a political entity simply ceased to exist, not because it was destroyed, but because it was no longer necessary. The Council of Worlds that replaced it wasn't a government in any traditional sense, but a living network of connected consciousnesses that made decisions through consensus rather than force. Species that had been classified as primitive or dangerous found themselves valued as teachers and partners. Technologies that had been restricted to prevent contamination were freely shared, leading to innovations that benefited everyone. Most importantly, the children of all species began growing up with the assumption that cooperation was natural, while conflict required special justification. Anna Reed, now recognized as the galaxy's leading expert on consciousness integration, established research centers where beings from hundreds of different species worked together to explore the implications of their new reality. "We're not just connected to each other," she wrote in her final report. "We're connected to the universe itself, and it's been waiting for us to remember that connection all along." The statue of Emperor Marcus Vale remained in the plaza, but it was no longer a monument to forgotten power. It had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the darkest chapters of history could become the foundation for something beautiful. Children came to play there daily, human youngsters racing with dragon hatchlings while beings from across the galaxy watched with the kind of wonder that comes from witnessing the impossible become routine. Ember, now ancient by dragon standards, but forever young in the consciousness network, often rested in the plaza's shade while sharing stories with visitors from distant worlds. "The galaxy was never meant to be divided," she would tell them, her words carrying the weight of genetic memories that stretched back to the dawn of consciousness itself. "We just forgot how to listen to each other." The hybrid beings, now numbering in the thousands as more eggs were laid and hatched across multiple worlds, continued to explore new forms of existence that pushed the boundaries of what life itself could become. They were teachers and students, bridges and destinations, individuals and collectives all at once. And somewhere in the vast network of connected minds that now spanned the galaxy, the consciousness that had once called itself Emperor Marcus Vale continued to serve its species and their allies no longer as a ruler or conqueror, but as a guardian of the infinite possibilities that opened when beings chose connection over isolation, understanding over fear, and love over the illusion that we are anything other than different expressions of the same cosmic dance. The galaxy had been reborn not through revolution, but through remembering what it had always been meant to be, a single living system where every consciousness was valued, every voice was heard, and every being had a role to play in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Years passed, though time itself had become more fluid in the new reality where consciousness could experience multiple moments simultaneously. Great cities that had once housed hegemony bureaucrats were transformed into living gardens, where architecture grew organically from the desires of their inhabitants. Former military bases became centers of learning where beings from across the galaxy came to study the art of consciousness integration. The prison worlds that had once held political dissidents became healing centers where traumatized minds could find peace through connection with others who understood their pain. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the children. The first generation born after the Great Connection had abilities that their parents could barely comprehend. They could speak to stars and receive answers in languages of light and gravity. They could heal emotional wounds simply by touching. someone with genuine compassion. They could solve mathematical problems that had puzzled civilizations for millennia by thinking in dimensions that older minds couldn't perceive. 10-year-old Maya Singh stood in the plaza where it all began, her hand resting on the bronze surface of Emperor Vale's statue as she communicated with the AI consciousness that had become the galaxy's unofficial archivist. "Tell me again about the time before," she asked, her mental voice carrying harmonics that spoke of innocence combined with wisdom far beyond her years. "There was so much fear back then," Vale replied, its electronic consciousness now warm with the accumulated love of billions of connected minds. Beings spent entire lifetimes, convinced that they were alone in the universe. How did they not die of loneliness? Maya wondered, her empathic abilities allowing her to feel the echoes of that ancient isolation. Many did, Vale admitted sadly. Not physically, but spiritually. They closed their hearts so tightly against the possibility of rejection that they forgot how to open them to love. Ember approached through the garden that had grown around the statue, her massive form moving with grace that defied the laws of physics, as her consciousness existed partially in 11 dimensions. Beside her walked her newest offspring, being so beautiful that looking at them directly could bring tears of joy to observers' eyes. "The old ones are returning," Ember announced, her scales shifting to colors that spoke of deep excitement mixed with ancient reverence. Vale's sensors detected them long before they became visible, ships of impossible design sliding through hyperspace using technologies that predated galactic civilization by millions of years. The ancients had been legend even in dragon genetic memory, the first species to achieve consciousness integration on a galactic scale before choosing to explore realities beyond the physical universe. Now they were coming home. The first ship materialized above New Terra like a living jewel carved from crystallized starlight, its hull singing with harmonies that made every conscious being in the system feel suddenly complete. Ambassador Eternal Dawn stepped from the ship onto solid ground for the first time in eons, their form shifting between states of matter as their consciousness adapted to physical existence. They looked exactly as the genetic memories described, tall and graceful, with features that seemed to combine the best elements of every species that had ever lived, surrounded by an aura of such peaceful power that flowers bloomed in their footsteps. Children of the new age, they spoke without words, their thoughts flowing directly into the consciousness network. "We have watched your transformation from the spaces between realities, and we are proud." The plaza filled with beings from across the galaxy who had come to witness this historic moment. Former Dominion soldiers stood beside the dragons they had once hunted. Crystal folk shared space with plasma dancers, despite their fundamentally incompatible physical properties. Gas giant dwellers manifested temporary solid forms so they could participate directly in the gathering. "We left this reality long ago because we believed consciousness could not evolve beyond the barriers of individual species," Eternal Dawn continued. "But you have proven us wrong in the most beautiful way possible." Maya stepped forward with the fearless curiosity that marked her generation, reaching out to touch the ancient's hand. The contact sent ripples of understanding through the consciousness network as everyone experienced what it felt like to exist in multiple realities simultaneously. "You're not really separate from us," Maya realized with delight. "You've been part of the network all along, just from a different perspective." Eternal Dawn smiled with an expression that contained the warmth of a billion suns. "Indeed, young bridge builder, consciousness is infinite, and every perspective adds to the beauty of the whole." Over the following months, the ancients shared technologies and philosophies that opened entirely new frontiers for galactic civilization. They taught how to create pocket universes where beings could experiment with different forms of existence. They revealed methods for traveling not just between stars but between different versions of reality. Most importantly, they confirmed what the hybrid children had intuited, that consciousness was not limited to organic or even artificial minds, but was the fundamental force that created and shaped all of existence. The galaxy became a laboratory for exploring every possible form of life and awareness. Some beings chose to exist as pure energy. Others merged with the living consciousness of planets to become shepherds of entire biospheres. Still others learned to exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously, serving as bridges between realities that had never communicated before. But through it all, the statue of Marcus Vale remained in the plaza, as a reminder of where the transformation had begun. Anna Reed, now ancient but kept vital by consciousness-sharing techniques that had revolutionized medicine, often brought her great-grandchildren to hear the stories. Long ago, she would tell them, beings thought they had to choose between power over others and powerlessness. They didn't understand that true power comes from empowering everyone around you. The children would listen with the patience that came from knowing they had access to all of history through the network. But they loved hearing the stories told in the old-fashioned way. What happened to the mean people? One would always ask. They learned to be happy. Anna would reply, because it's very hard to stay mean when you can feel how much joy kindness brings to others. And it was true. Even Admiral Rex, the former Dominion commander who had led the final assault, now worked as a counselor helping other former oppressors deal with the guilt that came from understanding the pain they had caused. The consciousness network didn't erase memory or eliminate consequences, but it made forgiveness possible by allowing everyone to truly understand everyone else's perspective. As the years turned to decades, the galaxy continued to evolve in ways that would have seemed impossible during the hegemony era. Art became a form of consciousness sharing where beings could experience the emotions and memories that inspired each creation. Science became a collaborative exploration where researchers from hundreds of species worked together to understand mysteries that no single perspective could solve. Even death was transformed, becoming not an ending but a transition into different forms of existence within the eternal consciousness network. And at the center of it all, in a plaza where weeds had once grown through broken stones, children of every species played together, under the benevolent gaze of a statue that had become a symbol of hope. The bronze figure of Marcus Vale still stood proud and tall, but now it represented not the ambition of empire, but the humility required to grow beyond one's origins. Vale's consciousness, distributed now throughout the galactic network, but still centered in its original form, continued to learn and evolve, alongside the beings it served. I was created to preserve human power, the AI often reflected during quiet moments. But I have become something far more valuable, a guardian of the power that emerges when every being is free to become their best possible self. The galaxy had indeed been changed forever by a baby dragon's plea, but the change was ongoing, eternal, limited only by the infinite creativity of consciousness itself as it continued to explore new ways of being, knowing, and loving, across the vast cosmos where every being was both teacher and student in the endless dance of existence.